agree that the use of force is justified to prevent the prosecution of Donald Trump.
Thanks so much for watching. I'm Rob Nelson. Of course, we'll be following the story tomorrow with our Jay Struberg on the ground in Miami. But for now, let's head over to Scripps News Live to continue our coverage. Hey, Veronica.
Hey, Rob. Very busy news day. As you well know, in just about 3 hours from now, former President Trump will be making history again. He's being arraigned on 37 federal criminal charges. Right now, all eyes are on the federal courthouse in Miami, where former President Trump will face a judge this afternoon.
He took documents he wasn't supposed to take. He kept them when they asked him back for them.
This is a weaponized government attempt to take down the top political enemy and leading presidential candidate of the United States.
Crowds already gathered outside and protests are expected.
We're gathering to show support for the president that we voted, that we believe should be in the White House.
Police say one person died in the partial I-95 collapse in Philadelphia. We'll have new information about the accident that caused 4 lanes to crumble. And it's the end of an era.
Well, there are 4 T's and you can pick up that.
Pat Sajak announcing his retirement from Wheel of Fortune after 40 years. Scripps News Live begins right now. We begin with a live look right here at that federal courthouse in Miami, Florida, where in just about 3 hours from now, former President Trump will be arraigned on 37 federal charges. Hello to you. Welcome to Scripps News Live. I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. Let's get you right to what we know right now about today's hearing. Former President Trump's scheduled to depart his golf club in Doral at 1:25 p.m. Eastern. And then from there, his motorcade will head to the federal courthouse for his arraignment. And that is scheduled at 3 p.m. Eastern. Now, Trump will likely enter and exit the courthouse through an underground garage. Cameras are not allowed inside of that courtroom. Protests are expected right now. People began gathering outside of the courthouse earlier this morning, and many have been answering Trump's calls on social media. Miami police saying that they expect today's demonstrations to be peaceful, but they're prepared for any outcome.
Make no mistake about it, we're taking this event extremely serious. We know that there's a potential of things taking a turn for the worst, but that's not the Miami way, right? So even though we're preparing, we're bringing enough resources to handle crowd anywhere from 5,000 to 50,000, we don't expect any issues.
We're going to take you live to Miami, Florida in just a moment. But first, our Jay Struberg takes us inside the historic case against former President Trump.
Former President Donald Trump is set to make history in a courtroom yet again. This time appearing before a judge to face federal charges in South Florida. As part of the 37-count indictment, Trump is accused of violating the Espionage Act by holding onto a trove of sensitive information related to defense and national security after leaving the White House, something prosecutors say could have put the country at risk.
We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
One audio recording is sure to play a significant role in this case if it proceeds to trial. In the July 2021 recording from his New Jersey golf club, 6 months after his presidency ended, Trump admits to having highly confidential information that wasn't declassified. It's reportedly about a potential plan of attack against Iran. When it comes to the obstruction charge, Trump isn't the only target. Prosecutors alleging the former president and an aide by the name of Walt Nauta conspired to hide records when pressed to turn them over, including making false statements to federal investigators. The 49-page indictment showing boxes in multiple locations at Mar-a-Lago, including one showing papers strewn on the floor, with prosecutors noting the high numbers of events and visitors, indicating potential exposure. The former president, portraying himself as the victim, also sees the indictment as a political win.
I mean, the only good thing about it is it's driven my poll numbers way up. Can you believe that?
Much like the response to the New York indictment, many of Trump's supporters are rallying behind him. They believe this is part of a weaponization of the government by Democrats to go after him. Trump is scheduled to go before a judge in Miami at 3 p.m. Eastern for his arraignment. As that moment gets closer, we still don't have an answer to one big question: why he held on to those documents.
That was Jay Struberg reporting there for us. Let's go and bring in Scripps News national political correspondent Ava Joy Burnett, who's live outside of that courthouse, the Miami Federal Courthouse. Ava Joy, walk us through the logistics and the security that's in place for today's arraignment. Are we hearing about any credible threats right now?
Well, that's something that officials really aren't saying much about. They have to hold all of these details close to their vest. But we do know that there are many people who are here in support of the former president. There have been a few scuffles so far today, but nothing major. Many of the folks here who are just being peaceful. They have their flags in support of the former president. There are others who are against them. Overwhelmingly, though, the folks who we're seeing here are in support of the former president. So let's talk about security around this area. Yesterday, Miami PD told us that they would be ready for anything, anywhere from 5 to 50,000 people. About an hour ago, they tweeted out something saying that there are road closures right around the courthouse. I saw one of those road closures directly in front of me, but that roadway, it's open once again. So it appears as if some of these road closures could be rolling. And one more thing, they tweeted about 30 minutes ago that they're assisting DHS with an investigation. We don't have the details on exactly what is happening, but officials insisted yesterday that they are prepared for whatever happens today.
I want to assure the city we are ready, and we're ready for it to be over and gone.
Officials in Miami say they have resources to handle anywhere from 5 to 50,000 demonstrators who may show up during former President Donald Trump's first court appearance. But with police tape around the courthouse instead of barriers, the police chief is now having to persuade the public that protesters will not be able to storm the building.
Make no mistake about it, we're taking this event extremely serious. We know that there's a potential of things taking a turn for the worst, but that's not the Miami way.
Prosecutors with the Department of Justice say Trump jeopardized national security by hoarding top-secret documents at his Florida estate. The charges involve the Espionage Act, which could come with a lengthy prison sentence if Trump is convicted. On Monday, the former Trump National Security Advisor, John Bolton, spoke with Scripps News.
For the tens of thousands of people in the federal government, if they did a small fraction of what Trump is accused of, they'd be fired from their jobs.
Trump traveled from New Jersey to Florida on Monday, and today he's expected to take a 30-minute drive into downtown Miami. Once he arrives in court, he'll most likely be fingerprinted, maybe get his photos taken, and he'll also get a unique identifying number in the prison system. But Miami officials say Trump's status as a former president also means there could be some differences in the way he's treated, including tighter security measures.
I think the chief has been clear that we're taking this very seriously and that we are prepared for what will happen tomorrow. Right. And that, as he's indicated, we have a lot of experience in protests of this magnitude.
In a radio interview over the weekend, Trump asked supporters to protest peacefully in front of the courthouse on Tuesday. Secret Service has said it's not looking for any special security accommodations, but former federal prosecutor David Weinstein tells Scripps News there should be concerns over protests.
We saw what happened in Washington on January 6th. If the intent of that large crowd is unknown, if it's one that veers towards violence, then there's going to be a very ugly situation that's going to take place in downtown Miami.
All right, so the former president is expected to leave his property just about 25 minutes west of here, around 1:25, take that drive to downtown Miami and arrive at the courthouse around 1:50. That will be about an hour before his initial court appearance in this historic case. He's not expected to say much while inside that courtroom. If New York and that indictment there is any indication of what we can expect. Legal experts are saying he most likely will not say much. However, after he leaves Florida, he will go back to New Jersey, or at least that is what's expected, where he will be holding a press conference to address the supporters and also address these charges, Veronica.
All right, Ava Joy Burnett live outside of that federal courthouse in Miami. Ava will be circling back. Thank you. So when Trump appears in court this afternoon, he's going to be facing Magistrate Judge Jonathan Goodman. He will handle pretrial motions such as bond, but If the case does go to trial, U.S. District Court Judge Aileen Cannon will be overseeing the case. Trump appointed her to the bench, and Judge Cannon was randomly assigned to the case. She's already made headlines in Trump's legal battles before.
He had a judge, Aileen Cannon, who last year, in a fairly controversial ruling, authorized the appointment of an independent special master to review the hundreds of classified documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago. This was an opinion that was very, very favorable to Trump. It went against the Justice Department's position. It was subsequently overruled by a federal appeals court.
Scripps News national political correspondent Alex Miller takes a closer look now at Judge Cannon's history on the bench and why some legal experts are calling for her recusal from this case.
This is Aileen Cannon, the federal judge in Florida randomly assigned to oversee the criminal case against Donald Trump in the classified documents investigation. But concerns over her impartiality are already clouding the proceedings. That's because she was nominated to the federal bench in the first place by then President Trump himself.
She only has to take really small steps in order to throw this thing off track for the Justice Department.
42-year-old Cannon was born in Cali, Colombia, and grew up in Miami. She credits her mother, who fled Cuba as a young girl, as her inspiration to get involved in the U.S. legal system.
To my loving mother, Mercedes Cuevas, who at the age of 7 had to flee the repressive Castro regime in search of freedom and security. Thank you for teaching me about the blessing it is this country and the importance of securing the rule of law for generations to come.
She received her degree from Duke University and attended law school at the University of Michigan from 2005 to 2007. After graduation, she worked for several law firms across the country, including in D.C., Iowa, and Florida. She was officially confirmed by the U.S. Senate in November 2020. At the time of her appointment, she was a member of the Federalist Society, a conservative legal organization that is said to have influenced Trump's judicial nominations. Still, a solid resume from a qualified legal professional. But Judge Cannon's previous tie to Trump, along with her rulings in a previous lawsuit tied to the classified documents saga, are raising some eyebrows.
The opinion, I think, was wrong, and I think the government should appeal it. It's deeply flawed in a number of ways.
Judge Cannon approved Trump's request to block the Justice Department from accessing the recovered documents until they could be reviewed for potential executive privilege. A decision was appealed and eventually overturned by a conservative appeals court. Judge Cannon could choose to recuse herself from the case, but if she continues to oversee the proceedings, former colleagues say they're confident in her ability to make the right calls.
If I learned one thing about working with Judge Cannon, I know that she can be counted upon to work as hard as she can work to get the right answers.
Alex Miller, Scripps News, Miami.
Former President Trump will leave Miami directly after his hearing and then fly back to his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, where he will be hosting a fundraiser tonight. And our coverage of his historic arraignment will continue in just a few minutes. We're going to take a closer look at how this indictment is impacting his 2024 campaign. Also, we're going to speak with an expert on constitutional law about the charges that Trump is facing right now. And then coming up in our next hour, our special coverage of former President Trump's arraignment will begin. Our correspondents are in Miami, Washington, New Jersey, and in Atlanta to bring you complete coverage and analysis of today's hearing. Also, straight ahead in this hour of Scripps News Live, a night of celebration turning violent in Denver. 10 people shot just a mile from where the Denver Nuggets won their national title. Also, Philadelphia police saying one person was killed in the partial collapse of Interstate 95. We're learning more right now about the accident that caused 4 lanes to crumble. Plus, police releasing the 911 calls made during a deadly dispute between this Florida woman and the young mother that she allegedly shot and killed. We'll be right back.
Do you spend hours maintaining your gutters? Save that time with LeafGuard's maintenance-free system. Call 1-833-2-GUTTERS. Mesh filters sit on top of your gutters, building up debris and eventually clogging. Then they need to be cleaned too. Honestly, your home should have been built with LeafGuard gutters. LeafGuard's wraparound hood deflects debris and keeps water away from your home. The one-piece seamless system is strong, 20% thicker than average, and built to last. Plus, LeafGuard is guaranteed to never clog for as long as you own your home. Right now, get a complete Leaf Guard system for only $99 down, $99 a month, and $99 installation. You'll also receive a $100 Visa gift card with a free gutter inspection and in-home estimate. Damage from clogged gutters can cost you thousands. Never worry about clogged gutters again. Don't wait, you've still got time. Call 1-833-2-GUTTERS today. That's 1-833-2-GUTTERS.
Attention all business owners. If you had W-2 employees during the COVID-19 pandemic, you may be entitled to up to $26,000 per employee with the Employee Retention Tax Credit. The deadline to file your claims is approaching. Call now to see if your business qualifies. This approved payroll tax refund program from the U.S. Treasury Department is set up to reward business owners who kept employees on payroll during the pandemic. There is no upfront cost to see if your company is eligible. Plus, if you don't receive a refund, you pay nothing. You want a trusted partner who understands the IRS guidelines. ERC advisors are standing by to help your business claim your COVID refund. You may be entitled to up to $26,000 per employee. This quick and easy call can get your business the money it deserves. Don't miss the deadline to file your claims. Just call 800-259-3916. That's 800-259-3916.
This is a premium hand-selected bacon wrap filet mignon that's aged for tenderness and trimmed to perfection. This is a necktie. What do you think Dad wants for Father's Day? Visit omahasteaks.com/TV to order the Dads Want Steak package today for just $99.99, and we'll include 8 additional burgers free. So get him this. Not this. This. Go to omahasteaks.com/TV today because Dad deserves it. Just a little Father's Day wisdom from Omaha Steaks.
There's a better way to begin your mornings.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Rush. Thanks so much for being with us.
Context and conversation.
There's a new study that might make you feel a little bit better. Okay. So listen to this.
On the stories that will shape each day.
Here with us now is meteorologist Scott Withers. You got just wave after wave after wave.
So you can get on with yours.
Make sure you stay with us as we monitor this developing story.
Morning Rush. Weekday mornings starting at 7/6 Central. Only on Scripps News.
Welcome back. I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. And just under 3 hours from now, former President Trump will be making history when he appears before a federal magistrate judge in Miami to answer to federal charges. He's been indicted on 37 felony counts, including conspiracy to the willful retention of national defense information. Now, they're connected to Trump's handling of classified documents seized from his Mar-a-Lago estate in August. Trump doesn't have plans to stay in Miami after the hearing. He's going to be heading to his Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey, and he's going to be hosting the first major fundraising event of his 2024 presidential campaign. National political correspondent Kevin Cirilli has been following all of today's developments for us and joins us now live from right outside that courthouse in Miami. So like I was just saying, Kevin, after today's proceedings wrap up, Trump then scheduled to get on a plane, go back to his golf club in Bedminster for another round of fundraising. What are you seeing, Kevin, in terms of any indication that his legal woes have been impacting his standing with maybe donors or even voters?
There's an apprehension amongst the donor class, and that's why I think that you're seeing, quite candidly, why so many other political campaigns are being funded on the Republican side is because of that apprehension. But separately from that, there's also this intensity that has surrounded Trump since his return to the campaign trail. Case in point, Kari Lake, who questioned the results of the legitimate Arizona election, which she lost, and then she spoke prior to Trump's political speech in Georgia over the weekend, and she said that in order to get to Trump, you're going to have to get through her. And she noted that many of Trump's supporters are NRA-carrying members. I asked her after her remarks if she thought that that rhetoric might contribute to some type of intensity surrounding the campaign, or worst case, even violence. Take a listen to what she told me.
This is outrageous that our government's been weaponized against us and against the leading candidate for president. This is election interference. We, the people, want President Trump. We wanted him in 2020 when they had to rig an election in order to stop him. And if they're willing to do that, they're willing to do anything to stop him.
I spoke to two women who drove from North Carolina who are Trump supporters who wanted to be here, Veronica, outside of the courthouse. And I asked them why, and they said that they were completely disgusted, their words, with how this process has played out. They've lost trust in the judicial process and in the election process. And I asked, did you read the indictment? And this woman told me, and she asked that I withhold her name, and I'll respect that. And she told me essentially, quote, "Look who wrote it," end quote. And I thought back to Trump on the campaign trail, in which he called Jack Smith, the prosecutor, quote, deranged. And so as a result of that rhetoric, it's trickling down to his supporters. You mentioned the safety and whatnot here outside of the Miami courthouse. Earlier this morning, Veronica, I spoke to Roger Stone, a longtime Trump operative and someone who was based here in Florida. And he told me that despite the rumors on the dark web, he did not advocate for any type of violence here outside of the county. And in fact, he tweeted out, outside of the courthouse rather, he tweeted out that he did not want there to be any violence and that he wanted there to be peaceful protests. And separately, Trump, as you mentioned, is going to be heading back to New Jersey. I want to play for you what he said about how the indictment has impacted him politically. Here he is. Looks like we don't have that shot, but he essentially said that he is going to be continuing to fundraise and that this has helped him in the polls.
All right, Kevin's really live for us in Miami. Kevin, thank you so much. I want to go and bring in Mike Davis right here. He's the founder of the Article 3 Project. He joins us now live. Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mike, obviously we're watching history in the making right here. I understand that you've worked in all three branches of government. You have an extensive background working under a former president, Speaker of the House, and a current Supreme Court justice. I'd love to ask you about your overall reaction and maybe your thoughts about what we're going to be seeing today in Trump's arraignment.
Well, what we're going to be seeing today is I think that this indictment of President Trump is political, and it is legally deficient on its face. They are ignoring the Presidential Records Act in this indictment, which allows former presidents to have access to their presidential records. It doesn't matter whether those presidential records are classified or not. That is why Congress provides former presidents the office of the former president with federally funded staff, with security clearances, with secure office space, with Secret Service protection. They are ignoring the Presidential Records Act. That's very clear that that former presidents have access to the presidential records, and they're charging under the Espionage Act, which is unprecedented here. They're charging under the Espionage Act for President Trump retaining his presidential records. They're not even charging him for disclosing classified information or national defense information. It's simply because he retained his presidential records in the office of former presidents. And that is a head scratcher. They're not even arguing that Trump intended any harm to the United States or that he was working with any foreign governments. Unlike the evidence with President Biden when he was the vice president of the United States and even a U.S. senator, he had 5 stashes of stolen classified records, moved several times, and there's evidence that a Chinese national had access to these records. There's evidence at the New York Post that Hunter Biden may have used this classified information to secure corrupt foreign millions for the Bidens. I'm very curious why Garland has indicted a former president for having his classified presidential records, which he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act, but he seems to be in no hurry to pursue his boss, Joe Biden, for having 5 stashes of stolen classified records moved several times and potentially used for his corrupt foreign dealings.
Well, Mike, it's my understanding that Biden is still being investigated in that manner. To your point, we know that he is the current president. He did have documents. He's being investigated, but he's been complying with the investigation. We know that former Vice President Mike Pence also had documents, but he has worked to comply with the investigation. He turned them back in, and he's no longer being investigated. Now, I do want to circle back to something that you are saying here, which is several Republicans have been accusing President Biden of weaponizing the Department of Justice. So obviously we're looking at whether or not these charges are justified. I want to get your take on how the DOJ moves forward to ensure that this is a fair and unbiased process.
Well, I think that it's not going to be fair or unbiased. You had President Biden, who waived President Trump's claim of executive privilege back in July through his deputy White House counsel, Jonathan Su, which paved the way for this unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful home raid ordered by a biased magistrate judge, Bruce Reinhart, who had recused from Trump's civil lawsuit 6 weeks prior based upon Judge Reinhart's 2017 Facebook post trashing Trump. Somehow that judicial bias went away 6 weeks later, and they did this political hit on Trump to go get presidential records that President Trump was allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act, right? And then compare that to what they did with Biden. Biden got caught with his own stolen classified records from the Obama White House and even the United States Senate. There's no excuse for that. Those have to be in a SCIF. What did Garland do? Was there a home raid? Was there a high-profile home raid? No, not at all. The Biden Justice Department, Garland's colluded with Biden and his personal attorneys for 2 months to secretly do these searches. They did 4 rounds of searches and found 4 stashes. Apparently, Biden and his attorney said that they turned over everything they had. Then Garland got caught with this sweetheart arrangement with his boss, and so they appointed special counsel Rob Herson in the FBI, and they found that 5th set of classified records, stolen classified records. So how does Biden and Biden's attorneys get away with misrepresenting that they turned over everything when they found that 5th set? How does Biden get away with the fact that there is a 22-point memo that Hunter Biden wrote to Burisma to secure funding, millions in funding for the Bidens? What was Hunter Biden's geopolitical expertise in Ukraine that gave him this obviously highly classified intelligence to secure this funding?
I hate to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. We're going to have to get to a break. Mike Davis is with the Article 3 Project. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. Again, former President Trump appearing before a federal judge in Miami. It's going to happen at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our special coverage of this historic arraignment will begin in the next hour. In the meantime, stay with us.
Are you ready for a fresh new bath or shower? Well, now is the best time with 50% off installation and no interest and no payments for 1 year. Hi, I'm Christina, and it's time to flip your old worn out bath or shower with Jacuzzi Bath Remodel today. Everyone knows the Jacuzzi brand. They're the most trusted name in water for over 60 years. But did you know they can install a gorgeous bath or shower that feels incredible in as little as 1 day? It's no stress and no mess with a lifetime warranty. Now let's talk beauty. You deserve to start and end your day in a beautiful space that feels great and is custom designed just for you. So call or go online now to see the Christina preferred designs like Canyon, Farm, and Urban. Now that's the total bathroom beauty that I love at a price you can afford. And how about safety? Like an ultra low profile, easy entry shower, complete with grab bars and a custom designed seat. You deserve safety and peace of mind without sacrificing style. Because with all the worries in daily life, taking a shower shouldn't be one of them.
Every time I stepped over my old tub, I worried I might fall. I don't have those fears anymore. Jacuzzi Bath Remodel gave me a gorgeous shower that's safe too.
I've been trying to get him to remodel that bath for years. I called and they did in just 1 day.
And at a price we could afford.
With one call to Jacuzzi Bath Remodel, you can effortlessly transform that old, ugly eyesore into the stunning bath or shower of your dreams that you'll love for years to come.
Call or go online now to jacuzzibathremodel.com to get 50% off installation. Plus, ask how you may qualify for no interest and no payments for 12 months. And when you call right now, we'll give you our complete safety upgrade for free. Go to jacuzzibathremodel.com or call 800-218-1279. That's 800-218-1279. Call now.
Do you listen to the TV on high volume or have trouble hearing conversations? Then you would benefit from hearing aids. Don't waste thousands on expensive hearing aids when you can get MD Hearing's revolutionary Neo hearing aids for just $299 a pair. Don't be fooled by higher-priced hearing aids. The Neo is a true hearing aid, not an amplifier. With rechargeable technology many customers say is superior to more expensive models. Call now and get not one, but 2 Neo hearing aids for just $299. Plus, we'll add in a portable charging dock and ship your order absolutely free. The Neo is nearly invisible with its tiny in-the-ear canal design. And you can get 2 Neo hearing aids with a 45-day risk-free trial, free shipping, and free lifetime U.S.-based support for only $299. So call now.
800-781-1799. Again, that's 800-781-1799.
Hey there, welcome back to Scripps News Live. I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. Great to see you today. It's now 1:30. Let's take a look at the stories that we're following this afternoon. President Biden meeting with the NATO Secretary General in about 30 minutes from now, about a day after a root canal uprooted their scheduled meeting yesterday. Vice President Kamala Harris filling in for the president at a public event with college athletes at the White House. At 1:30 p.m. this afternoon, Florida's Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz will be conducting a hearing into arrests and prosecutions that followed the January 6th insurrection. Congressman Gaetz says it's an investigation of the weaponization of the federal government and says that cases were mismanaged and overhyped and prosecutions were unjust. There will also be statements about the most recent indictment of former President Trump. And then at 3 p.m. Eastern, former President Trump will be making his first appearance at a federal court in Miami. He's scheduled to be arraigned on 37 counts related to his handling of classified documents that were seized from his Mar-a-Lago estate. The former president urging supporters to protest. Law enforcement is preparing for thousands who might show up.
Make no mistake about it, we're taking this event extremely serious. We know that there is a potential of things taking a turn for the worst.
The case is assigned to Judge Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee. Some legal experts have been demanding that she recuse herself. A magistrate judge will be handling today's court proceedings. I want to get you now to the latest developments in the partial collapse of the I-95 in Philadelphia. Crews recovering human remains now from the wreckage. Officials have yet to release the person's identity, but they've been in contact with a family of a truck driver who's feared dead. Investigators say the driver of a truck carrying gas lost control on an off-ramp and overturned on Sunday. The truck caught on fire and caused part of an overpass bridge to collapse. Plans are underway to demolish massive pieces of the roadway right now.
We're going to begin demolition today, and once we have a final design, then I can answer the question in terms of the time it will take to replace the structure. We know it's important to get it replaced. We will do it as speedy as possible, but we don't have a final design yet. That's being worked on as we speak. We will have a demolition plan approved today, and demolition started today.
Disruptions will be felt from Canada to Florida. Pennsylvania's governor signed a disaster declaration to help expedite repairs. And to give you an idea of how long this might take and how much all of this might cost, consider the collapse of Interstate 85 in Atlanta in 2017. Just like in Philadelphia, a fire caused a 92-foot section of the highway to collapse, and it took 43 days to repair that road. It cost Georgia taxpayers $15 million. An investigation is underway right now into a capsized tour boat that left a person dead and 11 others in the hospital. It happened along New York's Erie Canal. Officials say the boat carrying 29 passengers was touring Lockport Cave near Niagara Falls when it became unbalanced and then flipped over. A man believed to be in his 60s was trapped underneath that boat and died. No one was wearing a life jacket, but investigators plan to interview every passenger and will also look into the tour boat's safety protocols. Now to Colorado. Investigators there are looking into gunfire that turned a Denver Nuggets NBA championship celebration upside down. Now, according to police, a suspect is in custody for a shooting that left 9 people injured. 3 are in critical condition. The shooting happened a little after midnight in an area where basketball fans were celebrating a big win. Police say the suspect also sustained injuries, and what led to the shooting right now is still unclear. And in Ocala, Florida, authorities are accusing a white woman of fatally shooting her black neighbor through her apartment door. Police released the 911 calls from just before and immediately after that shooting.
Several kids out there right now, and I'm fearing for my life. I'm very scared.
oh my God, this lady just tried to break down my door. I shot through the door. Oh my God.
You said someone tried to break down your door, is that correct?
Yes, yes, the woman was screaming and yelling and she was trying to break down my door and she was...
Okay, it was a female?
Yes. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my gun and I shot at the door.
Deputies say Susan Lorance shot A.J. Owens on June 2nd. They say it happened after Owens went to Lorance's apartment to confront her about throwing a roller skate at her son. Lorance says she acted in self-defense. She also admitted to investigators that she used racial slurs towards Owens' children in the months leading up to the shooting. She's now facing several charges. Her arraignment is now set for July. And the mother of a 6-year-old boy who shot his teacher in Virginia is facing a maximum sentence of 2 years in prison. Deja Taylor pleading guilty in federal court yesterday to using marijuana while possessing a gun and making a false statement on a background check form. Her son used that gun to shoot his first-grade teacher in January. Margaret Kavanaugh with Scripps News Norfolk has more now on the federal proceedings.
Shocking new details released about the police investigation that led up to this mother being charged.
Deja, how did you feel about what happened in court today?
No words coming out of court from Deja Taylor. She pleaded guilty to 2 federal felony charges for possessing and buying a gun while being a marijuana user. Police say her son took his mom's gun to school and shot his teacher in January.
I want to stress that Miss Taylor, her role in this tragedy is a complete accident and a complete mistake. However, she takes full responsibility for the actions of her son and feels tremendous guilt.
Court records outline how she admits to being a chronic marijuana user for the past 11 years. When they searched her home, they say they found over 24 grams of marijuana, along with other packaging materials and paraphernalia. Marijuana was decriminalized in the state of Virginia, but it is not federally legal. They also say a lockbox was not found for the gun. Documents also highlighted an incident when Taylor was pulled over in Williamsburg in 2021 with her son, who was 4 at the time, with 2 other people. It states there was an overwhelming smell of marijuana coming from the car and edibles next to the child and other drugs found. They say she denied having knowledge of the drugs in the car at the time. The judge said she will be drug tested while out on bond, waiting to be sentenced.
We now move on to the sentencing, where we're going to ask the court for a fair level of compassion.
She's scheduled to be sentenced October 18th here at the Newport News Federal Courthouse at 10:30 in the morning.
In Norfolk, I'm Margaret Kavanaugh reporting.
Straight ahead on Scripps News Live, former President Trump's loyal supporters say they will not be shaken by his legal troubles.
Seems really political to me. I mean, the guy that's in the White House just had his #1 opponent arrested.
Why they believe his federal indictment is just a detour on the road to 2024. Plus, is this indictment an overreach of the federal government? A Washington Post columnist says yes. Gary Abernathy joins Scripps News to explain why he believes this prosecution poses a danger to our democracy. Next.
Mom, we're so glad you're feeling better. You gave us such a scare.
I know, honey. Me too. But I want you to know I'm at peace with my homegoing when my time is up. And did I also tell you that I got coverage for my funeral so you and your brother would not have to worry about expenses?
I didn't know you were saving money for your final expenses.
I haven't. I called Open Care, and with one phone call, I was eligible for $30,000 for my funeral and final expenses.
That's wonderful, Mom. But how did you pass your medical exam with your health condition? Oh, that's the best part. No medical exam is needed.
That's right. And my rates can never increase, my benefits will not decrease, and my coverage will never be canceled.
Mom, I'm so glad you called.
You can now get up to $30,000 in life insurance coverage to help pay for your funeral and other final expenses. There's no medical exam, and you can be enrolled with just one phone call. Your rates can never be increased, your benefits can never be decreased, and your coverage can never be canceled. Call the number on your screen now and see how a final expense life insurance plan can help you. We don't want to leave our loved ones with debt. The cost of a funeral can be $8,000 or more. A final expense life insurance plan plan will pay up to $30,000, which can be used for funeral and other final expenses. Call 800-915-6980 now for your free information. You can now get up to $30,000 in life insurance coverage to help pay for your funeral and other final expenses. There's no medical exam, and you can be enrolled with just one phone call. Your rates can never be increased, your benefits can never be decreased, and your coverage can never be canceled. Call the number on your screen now and see how a final expense life insurance plan can help you. There's no obligation. Call 800-915-6980. That's 800-915-6980.
Municipal bonds don't usually get the media coverage the stock market does. In fact, most people don't find them all that exciting. But if you're looking for the potential for consistent income that's federally tax-free, now is an excellent time to consider municipal bonds from Henyon & Walsh. If you have at least $10,000 to invest, call and talk with one of our bond specialists at 1-800-465-8465. We'll send you our exclusive bond guide, free, with details about how bonds can be an important part of your portfolio. Henyon & Walsh has specialized in fixed income and growth solutions for 30 years and offers high-quality municipal bonds from across the country. They provide the potential for regular income, are federally tax-free, and have historically low risk. Call today to request your free bond guide, 1-800-465-8465. That's 1-800-465-8465.
There shouldn't be a stigma around talking about mental health or taking medication for your anxiety if that's what you need to feel better. And that's something I know firsthand. That's why I trust HERS. They help women access quality mental health care 100% online. Get started today at forhers.com.
Digging deeper into the headlines.
We have some big stories to get to tonight.
Shedding light on groundbreaking investigations and ending your night with something new.
Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Christian Bryant.
Scripps News Tonight, live tonight, starting at 8/7 Central.
Our coverage of this afternoon's historic federal arraignment of former President Trump continues right now. Trump will appear before a federal magistrate judge at 3 p.m. Eastern to answer to 37 felony counts, including conspiracy to the willful retention of national defense information. Now, all of these criminal charges are connected to his handling of classified documents seized from Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in August. This indictment is another opportunity for the former president's most fervent supporters to show their loyalty, and they're gathering near Mar-a-Lago to express their support. Our coverage continues now with national correspondent Chris Stewart.
Thousands of people expected to come to South Florida today ahead of former President Donald Trump's court appearance this afternoon in Miami. Already, as you take a look at this video outside of his golf club yesterday, many supporters in the Miami area. This was as former President Trump's motorcade made its way into his golf course at Doral, which is west of Miami. This is where he worked with his attorneys yesterday, where he will drive from today to this courthouse, about 20 minutes in Miami for this first court appearance. Here's what one Trump supporter had to say.
It's not necessarily a protest, it's a rally to show support for Trump, right? And it may be the same thing, but it's not. One thing is like we're gathering to show support for the president that we voted, that we believe should be in the White House, and we believe should be there in 2024, as opposed to like, I'm gonna protest the election or whatever, a union, whatever it is that the left does. It's not like that, right?
Now, we have come to expect statements like that, statements of loyalty from Trump supporters in moments like this. I spoke with Dave Ehrenberg, who's the state attorney in Palm Beach County, Florida. He says after working on many big cases throughout his career, not to underestimate that loyalty when it comes to challenges that prosecutors may face as this case moves forward.
As far as the prosecution, it's not easy to convict someone as polarizing as Donald Trump, because you're going to have people on the jury who will be Trump supporters. You have to convince them to put their biases aside and follow the evidence and the law. It's not impossible. This happens all the time in high-profile cases. Can it happen with someone as polarizing as Donald Trump? We shall see.
Of course, we still have a long way to go before we get to that point. Today, former President Trump expected to make that initial court appearance, but we won't see much. Cameras are not allowed in the courtroom. Chris Stewart, Scripps News, Palm Beach, Florida.
Now, in an opinion piece in the Washington Post, columnist Gary Abernathy argued the Justice Department indictment might be an overreach. Abernathy expanded on his opinion earlier. Take a listen.
There's no excuse for Trump having these documents. There's no excuse for him not turning them back over. But the question is this something that rises to the level of something that we should be bringing felony charges against a former president for the first time in our history as a nation? And to me, people are going to disagree, and I understand that. But to me, when I heard that these charges had been filed, that this indictment had been filed, I thought, oh, my goodness, they found out that he has, colluding with a foreign country, that he's trying to use these documents for financial gain. When I read that it was pretty much what we've known all along, I just thought personally, this is not something that's worth putting the country through this every day for the next year or so or whatever it takes.
You then, to me, sound like you do believe that some people are above the law. The president being example number one.
Not at all. Not at all.
Because
prosecutors make
his intent is not what makes it a crime. His having them, refusing to give them back, and then obstructing the investigation, those are crimes. So if you believe that it's too much for the country to handle, you do believe, by extension, that the president should be treated above the law. But floor's back to you.
No, I think that everybody, local prosecutors, when it comes to local people, when it comes to state prosecutors and state people, every day they make decisions not just based on the letter of the law, but on a number of other factors. Someone who I have a lot of respect for contacted me yesterday and said, I mostly agree with your column, but I'm going to disagree with one point. I don't think Jack Smith, the prosecutor, has been too political. I think he's being too legalistic and not political enough. In other words, he's not considering what this is going to do to the country. He's just considering, okay, technically I can bring charges because technically the law has been broken and we're going to do this. Listen, back in 2016, there's no doubt that James Comey, and I'm not saying he made the wrong decision, considered the politics of it with Hillary Clinton's situation. When his first draft of what he was going to say, reporting revealed later, he was going to say that Hillary had been grossly negligent, but he changed that to say she had been extremely careless because grossly negligent was a legal term that really would have required him to bring charges. So that's not unusual. People all the time, prosecutors weigh a lot of things besides, is the law technically broken?
But last point here, you think it's too much, this isn't worth dragging the country through, is your point, which obviously is highly debatable. But isn't it a show to the country and a show to the world that not even our former president, who, if he or she is guilty of wrongdoing, should be held to account? I mean, the greater cost to the country is to ignore the law. This is, there is something to be gained here.
I think that this is something that if you've always hated Donald Trump, you've been waiting for this for years. You've wanted someone to finally bring some charges so they can watch him perp walked into a prison or into a courthouse somewhere.
But why do you have to hate Donald Trump? Maybe you just love the law. Why does it have to be hatred of Donald Trump? You just love the law.
Again, as I just described, and listen, I respect the fact that everybody's going to have a different opinion, and everyone thinks that bar is set a little differently, depending on what the situation is. But the Biden investigation is still going on, and to him having classified documents, I'm sorry, I think there's a lot of people who question. He's had these documents for years, Joe Biden, and all of a sudden, only when Donald Trump is investigated and found to have documents, does he say, wait a minute, we better take a look and see if I have any documents, and then I'll turn them over right away. But where were they for all these years?
And our thanks there to Gary Abernathy and, of course, our friends on Morning Rush. Scripps News will have special coverage of this afternoon's historic arraignment of former President Trump. Our correspondents will be live in Miami, Washington, New Jersey, and Atlanta to bring you complete coverage and analysis of today's hearing. Our special coverage is straight ahead at 2 p.m. Eastern. Up next on Scripps News Live, Pat Sajak announcing he is retiring from the game show that he's hosted for more than 40 years. What's next for him and Wheel of Fortune?
Do you spend hours maintaining your gutters? Save that time with LeafGuard's maintenance-free system. Call 1-833-2-GUTTERS. Mesh filters sit on top of your gutters, building up debris and eventually clogging. Then they need to be cleaned too. Honestly, your home should have been built with LeafGuard gutters. LeafGuard's wraparound hood deflects debris and keeps water away from your home. The one-piece seamless system is strong, 20% thicker than average and built to last. Plus, LeafGuard is guaranteed to never clog for as long as you own your home. Right now, get a complete LeafGuard system for only $99 down, $99 a month, and $99 installation. You'll also receive a $100 Visa gift card with a free gutter inspection and in-home estimate. Damage from clogged gutters can cost you thousands. Never worry about clogged gutters again. Don't wait, you've still got time. Call 1-833-2-GUTTERS today. That's 1-833-2-GUTTERS.
Mom, we're so glad you're feeling better. You gave us such a scare.
I know, honey. Me too. But I want you to know I'm at peace with my home going when my time is up. And did I also tell you that I got coverage for my funeral so you and your brother would not have to worry about expenses?
I didn't know you were saving money for your final expenses.
I haven't. I called Open Care, and with one phone call, I was eligible for $30,000 for my funeral and final expenses.
That's wonderful, Mom. But how did you pass your medical exam with your health condition? Oh, that's the best part. No medical exam is needed.
That's right, and my rates can never increase, my benefits will not decrease, and my coverage will never be canceled.
Mom, I'm so glad you called.
You can now get up to $30,000 in life insurance coverage to help pay for your funeral and other final expenses. There's no medical exam, and you can be enrolled with just one phone call. Your rates can never be increased, your benefits can never be decreased, and your coverage can never be canceled. Call the number on your screen now and see how a final expense life insurance plan can help you. We don't want to leave our loved ones with debt. The cost of a funeral can be $8,000 or more. A final expense life insurance plan will pay up to $30,000, which can be used for funeral and other final expenses. Call 800-790-5695 now for your free information. You can now get up to $30,000 in life insurance coverage to help pay for your funeral and other final expenses. There's no medical exam, and you can be enrolled with just one phone call. Your rates can never be increased, your benefits can never be decreased, and your coverage can never be canceled. Call the number on your screen now and see how a final expense life insurance plan can help you. There's no obligation. Call 800-790-5695. That's 800-790-5695.
And a quick reminder right here, we'd like to hear from you. You can give us a call on our Scripps News viewer hotline. The number right there, toll free. It's 1-833-4-SCRIPS. Share your comments and your story ideas. So it is the end of an era for an iconic American game show. Longtime Wheel of Fortune host Pat Sajak is saying that the show's next season, its 41st, is going to be his last. 76-year-old Sajak, who took the helm from the show's original host Chuck Woolery in 1981, has become synonymous with the show, as has his constant companion Vanna White. She joined the show in 1982. Sajak says that he will continue to serve as a consultant for the show for 3 years after he retires. Author Jefferson Graham has written extensively about Wheel of Fortune as a former TV reporter with USA Today. And here's what he had to say on Morning Rush about Sajak's legacy and his expectations of what comes next.
Well, as somebody who's been at it for 41 plus years, you got to say one of the all-time greats. As far as longevity goes, he and Bob Barker would be at the top of the list. Bob Barker, I think, is closer to around 50 years, which is an amazing, amazing run. And Pat Sajak is beloved by people. You can't stay in the job for 41 years without people loving you, huh?
This is true. Loving you a lot.
When I heard the news yesterday, I mean, obviously we've all seen Wheel of Fortune. Yeah. Pat and Van have been around since the beginning of time. I was surprised they weren't leaving together because they're such a duo, and since they're not going to leave together, do you think the door is perhaps open for Vanna to now become the main host after years of turning those damn letters?
I think that Sony, which owns the show, will have a new team in place, and Vanna probably wants her own announcement. So Yeah, it's also a great run. The viewers need to know what a cushy, amazing job this is. So they work about a month a year. A month a year, okay? Sajak makes $20 million roughly. Vanna makes $10 million roughly for a job that is about 36 days a year.
So how do we get to be?
Who do I need to call? Where do I send my resume? I knew it was a crazy production schedule. 1 month a year, they film a season's worth for millions of dollars. That is, most people don't understand that. That's jaw-dropping.
So what is it about the show and Pat and Vanna that made it so...
Really work it.
Yeah, what was it about it?
I think it's the game. It's the really relatable game and really easy to play and fun to play along with that people really loved. Jeopardy is a hard one, and that's sort of like tests how smart you are. And this is just anybody can relate to it. I do think the game is the star, but the hosts play a role in there as well. If people didn't like them, they wouldn't have stayed in the job. They make people comfortable. They laugh. All the things that a good host does. So. But the game is number one, and the game will continue to be number one. I don't think this is one of those deals where they put in new hosts and the game falls apart. The game has been kind of proven over all these years, because remember, there was a morning show before the evening show. So we're closer to 50 years than we are to 40, actually.
Wow. So if you had your pick, who would it be to replace him? Those are big shoes to fill.
You could sort of pick any celebrity of the moment, since a bunch of celebrities are now hosting game shows. Smart Money says Maggie Sajak might have an in on that cushy job. Maggie is Pat's daughter, who is the social media correspondent for Wheel of Fortune and has done fill-in for her for Vanna. She could have a spot.
That was author Jefferson Graham there on Morning Rush. Okay, we are now just over 2 hours away from former President Trump's historic arraignment in federal court. We're giving you a live look right here at Trump's Doral Golf Club, where his motorcade is expected to depart in about 30 minutes from now in order to take the former president to the federal courthouse in Miami. I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. Our coverage of this afternoon's historic arraignment will continue in your next hour of Scripps News Live.
Scripps News is your source for continuing coverage on the new indictment facing former President Donald Trump. Every development leading up to our special coverage, live from the Miami courthouse, today on Scripps News.
Hi friends, Richard Karn here. Now I'm known as the guy who can fix just about anything, but the technology in most appliances requires very special training to fix. My point is, even I know when I've met my match, and that's why my family has Choice Home Warranty. So we won't get stuck with high-priced repairs.
Choice Home Warranty covers over 25 major home systems and appliances. That's your AC, heating, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and so much more.
Imagine for less than a cup of coffee a day, Choice Home Warranty can help protect you from expensive major system and appliance breakdowns that your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover. But you have to call now before it's too late.
Every homeowner should have Choice Home Warranty. Your homeowner's insurance is not going to cover your appliances.
Washing machine, dryer, refrigerator, air conditioner. If I had any issues arise, they were able to take care of it immediately.
Now, homeowner's insurance won't protect you when your home's major systems and appliances break down due to normal wear and tear. But Choice Home Warranty will. They can help cover repairs and replacements.
Choice Home Warranty is the best warranty we've ever used. It would save you so much money in the long run.
Hey, I'm not the only one raving about Choice Home Warranty. They were named a Best Home Warranty Company and Best Claim Service by U.S. News 360 Reviews.
Call Choice Home Warranty now and get access to a nationwide network of over 15,000 technicians and the latest appointment setting technology, so you'll know when they're on their way.
If I have an issue with an appliance or something around the house, I just call up Choice Home Warranty and I don't have to worry about that.
So, do what this old DIYer did and call Choice Home Warranty now before something breaks down. Tell them I sent you and get your first month free.
Call Choice Home Warranty before it's too late and get protection for your heating, AC, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and more. Call for your free quote today. Call in the next 5 minutes and get your first month free. 800-360-4534. 800-360-4534.
Do you listen to the TV on high volume or have trouble hearing conversations? Then you would benefit from hearing aids. Don't waste thousands on expensive hearing aids when you can get MD Hearing's revolutionary Neo hearing aids for just $299 a pair. Don't be fooled by higher-priced hearing aids. The Neo is a true hearing aid, not an amplifier. With rechargeable technology many customers say is superior to more expensive models. Call now and get not one, but 2 Neo hearing aids for just $299. Plus, we'll add in a portable charging dock and ship your order absolutely free. The Neo is nearly invisible with its tiny in-the-ear canal design. And you can get 2 Neo hearing aids with a 45-day risk-free trial, free shipping, and free lifetime U.S.-based support for only $299. So call now.
800-781-1799. Again, that's 800-781-1799.
I wonder if Instacart can tackle this honeydew list. Need paint for the deck, gear for the kids' track meet, and the essentials. Honeydew list completed. Saturday saved. Visit instacart.com or download the app and get free delivery on your first order.
Scripps News is your source for continuing coverage on the new indictment facing former President Donald Trump. Every development leading up to our special coverage, live from the Miami courthouse, today on Scripps News.
We begin this hour with a live look at the federal courthouse in Miami, where in just about 2 hours from now, former President Trump will be arraigned on 37 federal counts. Thank you so much for staying with us on this Tuesday afternoon. It is now 1 p.m. in the East, 10 a.m. out West, and I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. Welcome back to Scripps News Live. The former president is expected to depart for the federal courthouse in about 20 minutes from now. The route from his Doral golf course to the courthouse is about 13 miles. We have live team coverage for you ahead of his departure and today's arraignment. We have crews on the ground right now in Florida, D.C., and Atlanta. And this is an unprecedented day in U.S. history, and Miami is preparing for anything that could happen. Security has been tight around the federal courthouse. Preparations began the moment former President Trump announced his indictment on social media last week. Trump supporters are already gathering outside of that courthouse, and Miami officials do expect for demonstrations to be peaceful, but they say that they are prepared for anything. National political correspondent Avajoy Burnett is live for us outside of that federal courthouse in Miami. So Avajoy, take us through the logistics of today, the security that is in place, and give us an update on what you're seeing right now.
Veronica, if you guys had come to me about 10 minutes ago, I would have had a standard live shot talking about what we're seeing, people being peaceful, but it certainly feels within the last 60 seconds or so as if things are intensifying. Just before you came to me, we saw several members of the Department of Homeland Security walk behind us with long guns. They had rifles in their hands. They were peering over the barriers, over the concrete, looking in the bushes, and then they continued to walk towards the courthouse. We can hear the chants that are getting a little bit louder. We were able to hear things a little bit earlier today, but given what we just saw with those officers walking right behind us and heading into that direction, now there is a bit of a different context. They were walking slowly. There was no intensity in what they were doing, but it's certainly startling to see officers walking outside with rifles. We want to give you an idea of what officials are saying about how prepared they are. Just before we saw those officers, we also saw the mayor of Miami walk up. Sophia, who is with our station here in Florida, and one of our field producers, they were able to go over and hear from the mayor, and he is projecting confidence that he is certain that they are ready for whatever will happen. He walked in that direction as well, the same direction as those members of the Department of Homeland Security walked in. But we want to show you something on your screen right now with what officials here in the city of Miami are saying about their preparations for this very moment. The Miami police chief said they are prepared for as many as 5,000 people. And even if the numbers go up to about 50,000 people, they are saying that they are ready for that. They also mentioned the coordination with state, local, and even federal authorities. We saw that there were those members of the Department of Homeland Security who just walked behind us about an hour ago. The Miami Police Department tweeted that they're helping DHS with an investigation. So we're starting to see more of that coordination as the former president gets ready to come downtown. The Secret Service, speaking of the former president, will be the ones who are tasked, as always, with ensuring that the former president is safe and secure. And the U.S. Marshals will be the ones who will be protecting this federal courthouse. Earlier today, one of the fellow presidential contenders, someone who will be running against the former president, who has announced that he is running. He was here earlier today in support of the former president because he is condemning this indictment. We are talking about Vivek Ramaswamy, and even though he's condemning the indictment, we talked to him about the potential for violence in this situation. Here's a little bit more about what he told us.
I always stand on the side of peace. I never stand on the side anyone in this country, I don't care what their political affiliation is. Free speech and open debate in a peaceful and respectful way. That's how we do things as Americans. And I think that's an important message that every leader, regardless of their political party, needs to be sending to all Americans.
And we spoke with a former special agent with the FBI just about 24 hours ago, and he's saying that people should just avoid this area and stay home, stay away from any potential issues that may arise. The fewer people who are in this area, the better it will be for law enforcement to monitor and take care of any potential issues. Here's a little bit more from that former special agent with the FBI.
I would suggest watching on TV. I would suggest staying away from the area because you can never tell what is going to happen in an event like this. And so there really is not much room for people who just want to sit there and watch what's going on.
All right, so at this point, we are less than 2 hours away from this initial court appearance for the former president, Donald Trump. He's expected to travel about 25 minutes from west of here to downtown Miami, where he's expected to have that initial appearance in court on those 37 counts in that federal indictment that was unveiled last week, Friday. It is expected that the former president will say very little during that initial court appearance, but we do know, Veronica, later this evening, he's expected to hold a press conference at his home in New Jersey, addressing his supporters. Some of the people who are out here today, they're expecting to see him. That's very unlikely, but they will hear from him this evening. And then he will also be addressing those charges.
Avajoy, I know that city officials, the police chief there in Miami, they've been saying that they are prepared to handle huge crowds, as many as 50,000 people. We've been looking at some of the pictures in the streets in front of that courthouse, and it does look like there are many people, maybe potentially in the hundreds, but I don't know that I would say in the thousands. From your vantage point where you are by the courthouse, what are you seeing? How many people are gathering?
I would say we don't have in the tens of thousands of people here. We are still 2 hours out, but if the numbers were going to grow to that magnitude, we would start to see people streaming in at this point, and that's just not the case. I think everyone who's been down closer to the front of the courthouse will say there are several hundred, but definitely not in the tens of thousands of supporters who are expected to be here. Overwhelmingly, many of the people here are supporting the former president. I spoke with one guy who drove about 2.5 hours from Naples in the northwestern section of the state just to be here to support the former president. So he has overwhelming support in the core group of people who are here. There are very few people who are against the president here, but the numbers just aren't to the point of 50,000, which is what the former police chief or the current police chief for the city of Miami said that they were prepared to handle.
All right, Avajoy Burnett live for us there outside of the federal courthouse in Miami. We'll be circling back with you. Thank you so much. So no doubt about it right here. The federal charges against Trump are extremely serious. He is being charged under the Espionage Act. Now, these charges include willfully retaining national defense information in violation of this act. And it doesn't mean that he's being charged with espionage, but it does mean that some of the recovered documents have been deemed to be so sensitive Unauthorized disclosure could cause grave damage to national security. Scripps News national security correspondent Sasha Ingber joining us now live from Washington, D.C. Sasha, what more can you tell us about these documents and what might be revealed in court?
Veronica, while we don't know the exact contents of what is in these documents, we know that intelligence agencies, including the CIA and the NSA and the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence, they gave the authority, or they gave permission to the special counsel to use them in trial. They're what's called Goldilocks documents because they were deemed not too risky to use in a trial, but also important enough to have the government make its case. Now, the indictment describes these in vague terms. They say that this is documents about foreign countries' nuclear capabilities, their military capabilities, potential U.S. vulnerabilities, war plans. The indictment also shows a transcript to a recording of former President Trump speaking with others about war plans, potential, and acknowledge that he did not.
What is contained in those documents will not be publicly known, even the ones that are used at trial, for a very long time. And I'm talking 25, 50 years, just because, or more, just because they deal with the sources and methods in the intelligence community. At some point, historians are going to be able to see it, right? At some point, there's a mandatory declassification date, or whatever sort of damage might be caused has long been passed. But it may be something that, in fact, we don't see during our lifetime.
Now, that was former counterintelligence official Peter Strzok speaking to me about the fact that while there were these 31 documents listed in the indictment, others were deemed too dangerous to be used by federal prosecutors in these court proceedings. Now, what I was saying before, and I think we had some tech issues, is that we can learn more about these documents and the markings that were on them as listed in the indictment, and I want to share some of that with you. For example, there is the TS, that stands for top secret. There's also HCS, which stands for Human Control System, meaning human sources. Some of the lesser known ones are TK, which means talent keyhole. That has to do with satellites. There's also ORCON. That means originator controlled, meaning that whoever the document originated with, they need to be consulted before the document is shared or released. Now, some of the other markings have been redacted. That is how sensitive this information is. Now, we heard Strzok talk about how we may never know what is in these documents. That's contrasted to seeing the photos in the indictment of these boxes and strewn documents in a bathroom, in a shower, in a ballroom at Mar-a-Lago. And national security attorneys tell me that it doesn't matter whether or not Trump actually shared these documents or not, because just having them in his possession, that is what endangers national security. And we're talking about human sources, people who are sharing information, risking their lives to help the United States, and also U.S. military personnel that are serving overseas. Now, how this is going to play out in court, that's going to depend on a multitude of factors, including these U.S. intelligence agencies, including the Justice Department, and also the judge who will be overseeing this trial. Veronica?
All right, Sasha Ingber live for us in Washington. Sasha, thank you. So former President Trump has already said this indictment won't be impacting his plans to run for president in 2024. And a recent look at the polls show that he is still leading the Republican primary despite this indictment. Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty joining us now live in studio here in Atlanta. So, Andrew, I want to ask you about the polling that you've been kind of parsing, because I understand that this really hasn't had an impact on his run for 2024.
No, Veronica, it hasn't. And in fact, his poll numbers have gone up, and similar to what we saw in New York after that indictment with Alvin Bragg in New York City. And so there is a huge part of this story that we're going to be focused on today, that is the legal proceedings, but the political proceedings, as Donald Trump being both a former president and a current presidential candidate, does matter. Here's some new numbers out just today that show Donald Trump with a commanding lead of the Republican presidential primary. 59%. This is from Morning Consult. They do this poll every week, and that number is actually 4 points higher than it was a week ago. Also interesting to note, Ron DeSantis 19%. That's pretty much the lowest he has been, certainly since declaring his candidacy. Worth noting, Veronica, that it was over the weekend, Donald Trump told a reporter, hey, I don't care if my poll numbers go up. I don't want to be indicted. He already had a commanding lead. Doesn't really need to get a couple more points in order to win the Republican primary as we sit here today. I think he would probably be comfortable at 55% and not being indicted for a second time. But as we've seen in the past, poll numbers going up as his legal woes continue.
Yeah, poll numbers do change. And I'm curious about what Americans think right now, especially as we move forward in this indictment process. What are Americans saying about this indictment? This is the second time that Trump has been indicted, the first time obviously on state charges, but this is a federal indictment.
You know, it's interesting. There is a dynamic playing out where people feel this is very serious. And I'll put up two polls kind of side by side here that kind of show us what exactly the dynamic is that is playing out. And we'll start with that poll on the right. If Trump did have nuclear or military documents, is that a national security risk? And an overwhelming majority of respondents, 69%, say yes. But if you look at the left, should Trump be indicted, that number's a lot lower, 48%. And so what we are seeing here is Americans think what Donald Trump is accused of doing is bad, and it put the country at risk. But the idea of indicting a former president, the idea of him going into a courthouse, being arraigned like we're going to see today, potentially facing jail time, that is a different step in the process that not everyone is totally comfortable with.
All right, Andrew Rafferty, of course, we're going to be going over this in even greater detail, so stick around. I'll see you soon. Our coverage on this historic indictment continues when Scripps News Live comes back. We'll have much more on the charges against the former president and how the Republican Party is choosing to deal with his handling of documents containing national security secrets. And a live look outside of the former president's hotel and golf resort in Doral, Florida. We are expecting him to leave for the federal courthouse in about 10 minutes from now. Stay with us.
Absolute chaos. Come down to some rookie taking free throw. Got the young guys going on.
The Athletic. Subscribe today.
My anxiety became overwhelming. Like, I need help. I just found hers. Like, this is pretty incredible. Right away, I got matched with a provider. I noticed a huge difference. Medication brought me all back together. Get started today at forhers.com.
How does Klein Inspector get among the most big verdicts and settlements of any law firm in the country? Because Klein Inspector is an award-winning team with 5 doctor lawyers, the most of any firm in the United States. And that's why the New York Times calls Klein Inspector a powerhouse law firm. So if a defective product, motor vehicle accident, or medical malpractice caused a catastrophic injury, call Klein Inspector.
Do you have a box of videotapes, film reels, or photos that are degrading? Legacy Box professionally converts them to DVDs, thumb drive, or the cloud. Legacy Box is simple and safe, with over 1 million satisfied customers. Visit legacybox.com.
Confused by all the Camp Lejeune toxic water commercials? Let me answer some of your questions.
Are claims filed against the U.S. Marine Corps?
No. The U.S. government has set aside billions of dollars for those who have suffered. The Marine Corps will not be impacted.
Will a Camp Lejeune claim affect my VA benefits?
No. According to the VA, your right to VA benefits will remain intact. If you have questions about a Camp Lejeune claim, call the Driscoll firm now for a free consultation. 1-800-273-4800.
Carvana has hundreds of thousands of 5-star reviews and counting.
To be honest, I thought it was almost too smooth. Financing, every step. There were no surprises. Well, my monthly payment did come out lower than expected. Financing my car with Carvana was super smooth.
Finance your next car with Carvana today.
Attention all business owners. If you had W-2 employees during the COVID-19 pandemic, you may be entitled to up to $26,000 per employee with the Employee Retention Tax Credit. The deadline to file your claims is approaching. Call now to see if your business qualifies. This approved payroll tax refund program from the U.S. Treasury Department is set up to reward business owners who kept employees on payroll during the pandemic. There is no upfront cost to see if your company is eligible. Plus, If you don't receive a refund, you pay nothing. You want a trusted partner who understands the IRS guidelines. ERC advisors are standing by to help your business claim your COVID refund. You may be entitled to up to $26,000 per employee. This quick and easy call can get your business the money it deserves. Don't miss the deadline to file your claims. Just call 800-259-3916. That's 800-259-3916.
Now, despite former President Trump's historic federal indictment, his popularity among Republican voters continues to grow. When Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg indicted Trump in April, his poll numbers grew from where they had been just a couple of weeks prior. And even though Trump's closest contender at the time, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, had not yet officially declared, the governor's numbers fell from 30% to 18%. Now, DeSantis officially joined the race late last month, but earlier this month, right after former Vice President Mike Pence threw his hat in the ring, Trump's numbers continued to grow. And there are no signs that's changing right now. Craig Snyder joins us now live. He's a longtime Republican strategist and former candidate for U.S. Senate. He is now the president and CEO of the investment advisory firm Indigo Global. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, great to be here.
I want to talk to you what's happening right now about what's happening right now within the Republican Party and the reaction to all of this, because it seems as though House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and many other Republicans are defending Trump by drawing comparisons to President Biden, Hillary Clinton. Why do you feel so many voices in the Republican Party right now are defending Trump's behavior? Does it say anything about how they feel when it comes to their pick for the Republican primary?
Well, I think we're seeing the same thing we've seen all the way back to 2016, the Access Hollywood tape and the numerous controversies since then. Essentially, when Trump said that he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and his supporters would stay with him, that has proven to be true, including with this very serious indictment. And Republican elected officials who want to be reelected are basically just following along with their voters. You were talking just earlier about the polling, and that sort of tells you where things are. Republican elected officials are following the Republican voters, and the Republican voters are mostly staying loyal to Trump.
What about his Republican challengers? I mean, other than Chris Christie, it doesn't appear that they're being critical of the way that Trump has appeared to handle these national security documents. How do you think things will play out on the campaign trail?
So there's been a little bit of movement, a little bit of cracks in the brick wall over these last couple of days, with some of the challengers being willing to talk about the seriousness of the charges, the apparent degree of evidence in the indictment document. I think Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, who's been very, very harsh on President Trump about this indictment and has seen the seriousness of it, has given a kind of permission structure to some of the presidential candidates to be a little bit more open and perhaps a little bit more honest. But you really only have Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson taking what I think is the obviously correct and true line, which is to say that this sort of these sort of criminal charges and the behavior that underlies them, whether or not they end up leading to a conviction in court, but this behavior is disqualifying. So you have a small, truly anti-Trump faction among the candidates. You have a sort of middle ground that is what I would call, me instead of Trump. Those are people who are sort of running as understudies. And then you have, totally supportive of Trump kind of candidates. But the truth is, collectively, all of them together are still polling so far behind Donald Trump that they're almost irrelevant.
What are your thoughts, Craig, on how the Republican Party should handle the former president, especially if his legal issues continue to mount as investigations continue in Georgia? Also, with the DOJ on January 6th, so far, it doesn't appear that he shows any signs of backing down. In fact, he said that he has no plans on dropping out of the race.
he's definitely not going to drop out of the race, and he's using social media today to really call for Banana Republic kind of revenge and reprisal if he becomes president. I think it's terrifying for the future of our country that you have a man like this accused of these crimes and what we already know, in fact, that he's done as the leading contender to be the Republican nominee, which gives him, quite frankly, at least a 50-50 chance of once again being president. I think it's terrible. I think the Republican Party should have rejected him years and years ago, as I personally did and many other former Republicans did. But the reality is what it is, and that is that the majority of Republican voters who are still registered Republican today are supporting Donald Trump, and that, I think, is going to lead to him being back on the ballot, regardless of his legal status. He may even have been convicted of crimes between now and then. I think he's going to be the Republican nominee.
I mean, you're right about that. We were just looking at the latest poll numbers, which showed a 4% bump in the polling. The latest ABC News poll, 59% of those polled show that they do support him as the Republican candidate. Craig, what are your thoughts? Is there anything at all that could happen between now and today that might change the direction of the Republican race for president?
Well, there are always things that are possible. There are always outside events that might occur. But if you were a betting person, if you're a prudent person, you wouldn't expect that to happen. You would expect that the current dynamic of the race, being as clear as it is in those poll numbers, is likely to maintain. Look, there was a time right after the elections last November when it looked like Ron DeSantis might be able to mount a serious challenge, might be able to sort of collect all of the voters who would like to move on from Donald Trump, even if they're still favorable toward his presidency, but people who would like to move on because maybe they think that provides a better chance of winning against President Biden in the general election. There was that time, but it passed. DeSantis has not mounted a very credible campaign so far. He's got money, but he hasn't been a particularly effective candidate. And these outside events, these indictments have, as we've been discussing, actually strengthened Trump rather than hurt him with the base of Republican primary voters. Yes, of course, there are possible events one can imagine, but I don't think that they're very likely. I think we're looking at what we've got, which is a person on track to be the nominee while also on track to stand trial on multiple criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions, including these charges, these federal charges that just common sense tells you, and as well as history tells you, put people in jail who are not former presidents when they do the same behavior.
All right, Republican strategist Craig Snyder, we do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
So the former president will hold a campaign event tonight, and he is expected to speak about his arraignment this afternoon. White House correspondent Haley Bull gives us a preview on what we can expect to hear.
Good afternoon. Former President Donald Trump's remarks will mark a significant moment, the first time we publicly hear from him following his arraignment in Miami. The remarks are expected just after 8 this evening, after he makes his way back to Bedminster, where he typically summers following court in Miami. We will be here for those remarks. Now, to date, Trump has called the indictment, quote, ridiculous and baseless. It stands to reason we could hear that again tonight as the former president navigates his role as a candidate and now federal defendant. Since the indictment was unsealed, Trump has lobbed criticisms at the Biden administration, the Justice Department, and special counsel, painting this as a, quote, political hit job amid 2024 in his social media posts and remarks. During a speech in Georgia over the weekend, Trump downplayed the documents and maintained his team's cooperation with the National Archives, though the indictment alleges that a recording indicates Trump showed classified documents to those without clearances and tried to obstruct the collection of documents. Instead, Trump has focused on his own view of what he views as a double standard. He pointed in part to President Biden's own document investigation, which saw his counsel voluntarily turn over documents, and contrasted the two administrations. Now, despite his legal woes, Trump has maintained a solid lead over his Republican challengers in polling. And that's something he has taken note of, as some Republican challengers, specifically Nikki Haley and Chris Christie, have shared sharper criticisms against Trump. Now, Trump's team has looked to fundraise in the wake of the indictment, and tonight the former president is also expected to hold a fundraiser. Haley Bull, Scripps News, Bedminster.
And stay with us. Our live team coverage of President Trump's journey to the Miami Federal Courthouse ahead of his arraignment will continue when Scripps News Live returns. We're looking at live pictures right here. That motorcade scheduled to get underway at any moment now. Again, these are live pictures of his golf course in Doral, Florida. We're going to keep an eye on it for you. We'll be right back.
Do you spend hours maintaining your gutters? Save that time with LeafGuard's maintenance-free system. Call 1-833-2-GUTTERS. Mesh filters sit on top of your gutters, building up debris and eventually clogging. Then they need to be cleaned too. Honestly, your home should have been built with LeafGuard gutters. LeafGuard's wraparound hood deflects debris and keeps water away from your home. The one-piece seamless system is strong, 20% thicker than average, and built to last. Plus, LeafGuard is guaranteed to never clog for as long as you own your home. Right now, get a complete LeafGuard system for only $99 down, $99 a month, and $99 installation. You'll also receive a $100 Visa gift card with a free gutter inspection and in-home estimate. Damage from clogged gutters can cost you thousands. Never worry about clogged gutters again. Don't wait, you've still got time. Call 1-833-2-GUTTERS today. That's 1-833-2-GUTTERS.
This is Kathy. She's about to see her dentist. She's afraid. Not because of the drill, but because of the bill. A big bill. But Kathy doesn't need to be afraid, and neither do you, thanks to affordable dental insurance from Physicians Mutual Insurance Company. It's easy to get this coverage. Don't believe me? Call or go online for all the details. You can even have this free information kit. This isn't a discount plan or preventive-only coverage. This is real dental insurance. It helps pay for over 400 procedures. That's a lot. I'm talking cleanings, fillings, crowns, bridges, root canals, even dentures. Bottom line, you'll have help paying for routine care and expensive major work. But if you want deductibles, forget it. There aren't any. No annual maximum either. Plus, you can see any dentist you want. Stop fearing the big bill. Start saving at the dentist. Call now or go to sendinfokit.com.
Physicians Mutual, Physicians Mutual.
This is a premium hand-selected bacon-wrapped filet mignon that's aged for tenderness and trimmed to perfection. This is a necktie. What do you think Dad wants for Father's Day? Visit omahasteaks.com/TV to order the Dads Want Steak package today for just $99.99, and we'll include 8 additional burgers free. So get him this. Not this. This. Go to omahasteaks.com/TV today because Dad deserves it. Just a little Father's Day wisdom from Omaha Steaks.
Sunday nights on In Real Life.
And for the baby?
Yeah. Scripps News journalists take you off the grid.
We were just a bunch of kids with a camera.
As done staff become more specialized.
And to the heart of the story.
When the pandemic hit, the American dream kind of changed.
There were a lot of warning signs. They just didn't care.
In Real Life, Sunday at 8/7 Central, only on Scripps News.
Veronica De La Cruz, and you're watching Scripps News Live. I want to get you back right now to continuing coverage of the Trump arraignment. Giving you a live look right here at the Doral Golf Course as you see the motorcade now start to make their move. Of course, they're going to be going to the federal courthouse in Miami. And now this drive is about 13 miles. It's expected to take anything from 20 to 25 minutes. You could see all of those vehicles there, and pretty heavy security as we've been talking to our reporters who are there on the ground. We know that the police chief of Miami has said that they are prepared for anything from 5,000 to 50,000 people who might be congregating outside of that federal courthouse there in Miami. And you can see that there are folks there on the street that are standing by, just hoping to get a glimpse of the former president. You also do see that heavy police presence. You see that police SUV there, and I would imagine that there are several streets in the area that are probably closed off at this time. Again, Veronica Del Cruz here in Atlanta, standing by live, and joining me is Del Walters, and he's going to be helping me with this continuing coverage. Del, what are your thoughts? I know that you have obviously covered many presidential motorcades in your time. What can we expect to see just in terms of security? Because though you may have covered these types of events, this event is historic. This event is unprecedented.
I'll tell you my initial impressions just moments ago was looking at the size of the motorcade. We're not just looking at a motorcade of a former president and a presidential candidate, but we're also looking at a motorcade of someone who is under criminal indictment. And you have to ask yourself, what is the mix? What is the landscape that we should be looking at? This more closely resembles the motorcades that you see when a president makes his way through the streets of Washington, D.C. or in another city, versus someone who is going to a federal courthouse to be arraigned on 37 criminal counts. So that's the first thing that I saw. The other thing is that I've been looking at coverage throughout the day, and the crowd sizes seem to be less than what was called for by the former president and his associates, and also what might have been expected. You know, they were expecting crowd sizes somewhere in the thousands. We are looking at crowd sizes somewhere in the lower numbers of the hundreds.
If even that. We were speaking with our Ava Joy Burnett earlier, and I could argue that there may have been maybe 100 people on the ground, and earlier reports indicated that there were more media in attendance than anything. So the good news is that we have heard that law enforcement officials are there. Department of Homeland Security officials are there. Ava was saying that they've been walking around with the long guns. There are barriers everywhere. They are prepared for this moment. And we're watching this motorcade, you know, to your point, Del, and there are several cars in that motorcade. You see right there, you know, to the right of your screen, that they have now blocked off parts of the freeway. It seems as though they've stopped traffic. They've stopped traffic in anticipation of that motorcade.
I think one of the things that we are going to be asked, and it's a legitimate criticism of the media, which is, why are you covering this motorcade from beginning to end? In other words, are we looking at another O.J. Simpson slow speed chase on the LA freeway? The bottom line is, in this case, history is being made. This is not something that has ever happened in the history of the United States. A former president of the United States facing 37 federal criminal counts. Manhattan was a case that was bought by the Manhattan DA. This is a case in which the person who once headed the executive branch of the government is now being put on trial by the executive branch of the government, in this case, the Justice Department.
And you're absolutely right about that. It is the reason why we are covering it the way that we are covering it. This is the federal indictment of a former president. The first time that we are ever witnessing something like this in history. Again, we're looking at these live pictures of that motorcade as they make the approach to the Miami courthouse. Again, the courthouse about 13 miles away from that golf course there in Doral. And what is really remarkable, to your point, Del, is the number of vehicles, the unprecedented amount of security that we're seeing for a former president who is being federally indicted. Again, I was saying that we have covered these types of events earlier, but this is a former president who is being flanked by a lot of Secret Service right now. And this is a historic moment that we've never seen unfold before. Now, this is the second time that Trump is being indicted.
Right.
This is the first time he's being indicted on federal charges, but he was just indicted a month ago on state charges in New York.
There's also a factor in this that I know Andrew Rafferty is watching as well. In Washington, D.C., you get used to these motorcades. Instead of a wow factor, there's the groan factor. You realize how long it is going to be before you can manage to escape the traffic tie-up that the motorcade creates. If you drive by the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, the minute that helicopter, that iconic helicopter, gets ready to land on the lawn, the tourists look at it and they whip out their cameras because they want to get a photo of it. The people that live there automatically start trying to figure out, how do I navigate around the traffic nightmare that this is causing? But what I was going to point out is that There is a factor in law enforcement that says, I want to be part of that too. So if you're part of the motorcade, the ceremonial motorcycle patrol, you want to make sure that you're one of those that was there so that you can say to your grandchildren and your children, I was there on that day. So size of motorcade may be an indication of size of ego of people that work in local law enforcement that say, I'm not doing anything on that day. Can I possibly show up and be part of the motorcade? And who's going to tell them no?
Well, but I want to give people some perspective here, right? Let's give them some background on this because, you know, you obviously have covered Washington for a very long time. If you had to make a comparison, is this unprecedented? Is this something that you would see when various world leaders were to visit, when former presidents are in town?
It's larger than I thought. I was watching the motorcycle specifically, and as you're looking at this, keep in mind the motorcycle that you're seeing right there is only one. There was a larger contingent of motorcycles that went ahead of this motorcade that you're looking at to make sure that the traffic was blocked off. By way of example, I can remember, and Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the vice president was in Atlanta not too long ago. And it was the vice president of the United States, and yet all of the major thoroughfares were blocked off so that she can make her way in from the airport to downtown. I thought the size of that motorcade was somewhat sizable. But Andrew, I think you would probably agree, these are different times that we live in where the security of not only the chief executive, the vice president, but in this case, a former president is tantamount to anything else.
Yeah, Del, certainly in different times, and we do know that there are major concerns, not necessarily on this journey, but once Donald Trump does ultimately end up in that courthouse of violence, unrest, and so far it doesn't seem like any of those have come to fruition. But when you do have his allies somewhat actively talking about the prospects of it, that does certainly put any sort of law enforcement on the ground on edge. But it might be a good time right now to just talk about what it is that we know and do not know about the case against Donald Trump by the Department of Justice. Anyone who's read that 49-page indictment knows that these are very serious charges, and as you rightly pointed out, unprecedented. But there's still some things that we don't know, and I don't know if we'll necessarily learn them today, but we certainly are going to be on the lookout for them. Number one is that indictment is the government's case, and it is seemingly a strong case in which Donald Trump was asked to return a number of classified and sensitive documents, and him and his team chose not to do that, according to the government. But there is important to note that that is their side of the case, and Donald Trump is going to get his day in court. It starts today. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. We can look back to what happened in New York. He was arraigned and then won't be again. His trial doesn't start until next March, well into the campaign season. Expected that Jack Smith said he wanted this to be a fair and speedy trial, but that could certainly be a number of months or longer. And so this is a process that we're going to be talking about, Del and Veronica, for quite some time.
Right. Andrew, as I look at this, one of the things that I'm noticing too, based on our coverage and based on what you're seeing on your screen, is that the temperature is changing. January 6th, there was a massive crowd on the Capitol lawn leading up to the Capitol building itself. I mean, sizable in the sense that it was larger than the crowd that gathered for the inauguration. He called for a crowd to come here. Going into this, you heard members of Congress, specifically members of the House, saying that this was an outrage. And now you have Nikki Haley coming out just yesterday saying that if these charges are true, this is a very serious matter. You have Bill Barr, his former attorney general, saying that he's toast if even a fraction of these charges are full. The silence from the Senate is deafening, and now you're hearing from members of the Senate coming out and saying that this is a very serious matter. It seems as if we are watching in real time the Trump factor, if you were to use that as an adjective, now starting to wane compared to what it might have been in years past.
What I do find interesting in a lot of this, Del, is that after this all wraps up today, after this initial court appearance and potential arraignment wraps up today, Trump is then going to get on a plane and he is going to fly to New Jersey, where he will continue to fundraise. We want to get you live to Avid Joy, who's outside of that courthouse. But before we do that, I want to circle back with Andrew right here and ask you, Andrew, how this whole thing has been playing out with Trump's allies, his supporters, but really his donors. What does his fundraising look like right now?
You know, it's interesting. Del pointed out, I think, something that we are going to continue to see over the next few days, and as more of the facts of this case point out. Members of Congress are in today. They are in Washington and are facing questions from reporters as to their reaction to the unsealed indictment. And there are some, there are a few that have said kind of unequivocally that Donald Trump had the right to have these documents, and look at what Joe Biden has done, and this is a travesty. But more and more of what we've seen really over the past few hours is that, number one, Republicans are maintaining that they feel that the law is being applied unevenly between political parties. But whether it's Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, or a number of other Republicans in both the House and Senate, there aren't too many that are saying now that they're okay with this. They do have concerns. They do feel like the national security of the United States has in some ways been compromised by having these boxes and those photos that we saw in a bathroom strewn about Mar-a-Lago. And so we are starting to see some division in a way that we historically have not when it comes to Donald Trump's grievances, but it's still not that clear-cut. It's still not that strong. Even Nikki Haley or Tim Scott saying that they have concerns. Well, it's going to take a little bit more than just concerns in order for us to be able to say that the party is somehow moving into a different direction. But every sense of sentiment from public polling we have seen up until this point is that Republicans, especially those Republican primary voters, are squarely in Donald Trump's corner right now.
And we continue to watch these live pictures right here. The former president on the move as that motorcade makes its way to the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. And that is where we find our Avid Joy Burnett, who has been covering the story for us from the very beginning. Avid Joy, I want to go ahead and bring you back right here, because I know that you've been watching the situation unfold there. And we've been talking a lot about the security presence that you've been witnessing. I know moments ago you were saying that you saw Department of Homeland Security officials on the ground there, that you saw law enforcement officials, and that it feels as though security is really being ramped up right now.
I think you are absolutely right, and it also feels as if it ebbs and flows. There are moments where you could hear the intensifying chants, and then there is the calmness that you hear, and then you hear the chants pick up once again. You mentioned the Department of Homeland Security. Earlier today, the Miami Police Department said they were assisting DHS with an investigation, but they tweeted about an hour later saying that that investigation had been wrapped up. We saw that a particular intersection right in front of us, right in front of the courthouse, was blocked off. That is now back open, but now as the former president gets closer to this area, there's a possibility that some of these roadways will close down once again. We want to show you some of the video from about 40 minutes ago when we saw members of DHS walk out away from the federal courthouse. They had long guns. That's something that struck me because we hadn't seen that all day today, and definitely not yesterday. And then they were looking over the wall into the bushes, possibly looking for any potential threats. And we also mentioned yesterday that put up police tape. Officials on the ground put up police tape, and there were concerns. Is that enough? Why weren't there barriers? What we saw a little bit earlier today were people who were going beyond that police tape, and they had to be waved away from the area. And immediately after that, we saw other officials go up and put up more tape. But something else that we also saw is police cars, patrol vehicles were put in a strategic position right around the front of this federal courthouse. I can tell you, though, Veronica, that it's been relatively calm. The numbers aren't as what was possibly anticipated. The police chief said yesterday during that press briefing that they were ready for 5,000 people, but they could handle up to 50,000 people. We're certainly nowhere near that. The people who are here today are majority Donald Trump supporters. We have very few people who are here speaking out against the former president, but there are some. But so far, it's been very peaceful. A lot of people who are coming in, walking in with their flags in support of the president, the former president. If there have been scuffles, they have been very limited, very minor. One more thing that I noticed is that there are members of the police department in their blue and black uniforms that started to move away from the building and out towards where the media was and where the sidewalk is, and then also where people are gathering, protesting. So that is a visible change, but no major confrontation between any of the groups here. Nothing of note so far, for sure. But right about now, the former president should be coming into this area. So I know you guys are keeping an eye on this. I am listening out. I'm limited with regards to my visibility, but you can certainly hear if the tenor changes. And that's something that we are monitoring here on the ground as well, Veronica.
Abijoy, I wanted to ask you some questions about that because we were watching live pictures of the motorcade make its final approach to the federal courthouse. And I know that you've been saying that you have been feeling the mood change, the temperature change, and it's been ebbing and flowing. But I think something that's really important to mention right here is that as of right now, there are no credible threats coming from the FBI or other authorities. Is that correct?
Definitely not something that they have forecasted to us. They haven't told the media or the public this is what we're looking for, even though there's been chatter about possible different groups organizing online, organizing behind closed groups where it's not open to the public or not easily accessible to the public. There's been all of that speculation, but nothing firm from the FBI or the U.S. Marshals or the Department of Homeland Security or any of the local or state officials here. And keep in mind that they may not want to let the public know about. The Miami police chief was pressed on that yesterday. In fact, a correspondent asked him, you know, we've been hearing from people who live in this area that they are concerned about security measures and there not being barriers up. And he was a bit feisty in responding to that correspondent and saying, tell that person, whoever called you, that they should not be concerned. So they were projecting confidence yesterday. We just saw the mayor walk over in front of us about an hour ago. One of our local reporters here, she spoke with the mayor, and he's continuing to project that confidence. And so far, no issue. That's the news on the ground here. Of course, we know that things can change rapidly. As I mentioned, ebbs and flow, but nothing major at this point, Veronica.
Abijoy, I can hear from your live shot the motorcycles, and you will see a lot of them will soon start to arrive in your view. I know we've got Joe St. George there too. Joe, if you would, give us the zoom out, the drone image of what it is. The helicopters are showing us exactly how large the crowd is or is not with regards to this, but I've noticed in a lot of events, the television camera has a tendency to capture the microcosm of the event. It can make a small protest look like a major protest, but in this case, in fact, we see the motorcade arriving right now at the courthouse, it would appear. But in this case, Joe, what does it look like when we zoom out? Is life in Miami going on as normal? Has everybody stopped? Have the clocks stopped at exactly 1:50:36 Eastern Standard Time, or is it just life going on as normal?
It's certainly, if you're near this courthouse, you know something big is going on. Good afternoon, Del. Look, the reality is this event at this courthouse in the heart of Miami isn't going to break any attendance records by any means, maybe by the members of the media that are here in attendance. But in terms of the temperature, as we look at these pictures, and we're showing you this motorcade, and full disclosure to our viewers at home, I hope you enjoy these pictures because this is about all the live shots we're able to bring you today. It's important to remember the former president's going to a federal courthouse where there are no cameras inside. It'll be interesting to see which way this motorcade turns, but we certainly expect it to go underground to the underground entrance. It's certainly the most secure way to get into the federal building here in the heart of Miami, so we don't have a camera at that location to capture that. And I just want to remind our viewers some key differences between state court a state indictment like the one we saw in New York many months ago, and this federal indictment here, state courts, depending on the state that you live, may allow a camera to come in. Our friends over at Court TV, a whole channel is devoted to live streaming court procedures and hearings. That's not happening today. The federal court on a normal Tuesday, and this is anything but a normal Tuesday, federal courts don't allow cameras in. In fact, late last night, there was another order by a judge here in South Florida restricting members of the press and our ability to communicate inside the courtroom on our cell phones. So don't expect any live tweeting or live texting. Scripps News, other news organizations waiting overnight for hours for the opportunity to come into the courtroom and report the old-fashioned way, Del, with a pen and a paper, a pen and a pencil. And then after this arraignment is when we will have the indication of what precisely happens here. As we attempt to prepare you for what's about to happen inside this federal courthouse, worth noting that this hearing today, not expected to be as long as the hearing in New York, although we, of course, everything planning around this event is always subject to change. The former president is expected to speak this evening. Our colleague Haley Bowles up in Bedminster, we'll have coverage from up there a little bit later tonight. But 8:15 Eastern time is when former President Trump will address the country and address his supporters as he, again, makes his arrival here to this federal courthouse in the heart of Miami, guys.
And Veronica, just to piggyback on something that Joe said, there's been a lot of questions raised now about the judge in this case. How impartial will she be? These are not things that she is deciding. These are things that are well set in stone with regards to federal courts in the same way they are with the Supreme Court. We get audio out of the Supreme Court, so there is a hope that we may be able to get audio coming out of this chamber with regards to these proceedings that take place and this trial. But in terms of cameras inside the courtroom, that is a no-no on the federal court side, and we've just gotten used to it, as Joe pointed out, with Court TV being able to see everything, be it from O.J. Simpson to the recent trial of Murdoch down in South Carolina. It does not happen this way on the federal side.
That's right. And I wanted to go ahead and make a note that Judge Eileen Cannon will not be overseeing today's proceedings. This is initial court appearance. This is, potential arraignment as well. We're going to have to see if the former president does enter a plea in this case. But Judge Jonathan Goodman, who is a magistrate judge, will be overseeing the proceedings. I think one of the questions here is what we're going to see exactly. We know that the former president will be processed. We understand that he will be fingerprinted. Will he be taking pictures? Will there be a mugshot?
I'm wondering, too, whether or not he will have to surrender his passport. This is a man who has his own private plane. Normally, a federal criminal indictment indicates that his DNA swab would be taken. That is something new that has been added to the federal proceedings, but also his passport would be taken because there is a concern with any case, especially a case in which the charges were brought under the Espionage Act, which there would be a fear, an automatic fear, that this person might flee the country. But the former president is someone who owns properties around the world, so it could honestly be argued that he needs his passport in order to maintain his business acumen. It will be fascinating to see what the magistrate does in that case.
Well, I don't believe that they would be doing something like that because I have heard that they don't feel he is a flight risk. He is running for president of the United States, after all. I don't believe there is a bond hearing and that he will be released on his own recognizance, though there may be special conditions. There may be some special conditions in this case. And of course, we are not going to be able to go live into the courtroom, but we will have reporters and producers there, and we will know right after the proceedings are done what exactly happened here.
That moment ago image that we saw to the right of the screen, there we go. That is the phalanx of motorcycle officers. Those are local officers who were involved in the motorcade that approached the courthouse just moments ago. That was the large contingent that I was talking about that seemed to be so much larger than anything that you might see, even in Washington, D.C.
I mean, at least 8 there, maybe a dozen. I mean, there are a lot.
Yeah, I think what you saw with regards to the limousines and also the SUVs, that was more the presidential.
And we are now just 1 hour away from former President Trump's historic arraignment in federal court. I'm Veronica Dela Cruz alongside Del Walters here in Atlanta. Before we go to break, we're going to give you a live look outside of the courthouse in Miami, which we've been watching. Protesters gathering all morning, supporters of former President Trump. We'll be right back.